In this video, I'm going to show you how you can create this chatbot here in Angular and Node.js. So let's get started. So this project will comprise of two parts. The first thing we're going to create is an API, and then after we create the API, we're actually going to create the Angular application. So first of all, let's create a new folder in here, and we'll call it API. Then inside our terminal at the bottom, we'll cd into that, and we run npm init to initialize a new npm project. So we'll just call this API, version 1, description, so we'll enter through all of these. We'll create the index.js file after this script has run. Okay, so that should now have a package.json file in here. We'll create the new file, which is the index.js file, and that's our entry point for our API. So now we need to install a few node modules in order to get up and running. So they are npm I, and it's going to be OpenAI, Express, body parser, and cause. So we hit enter, and that should install all of those packages for us. If we jump into our package.json file, we can see that these have now been installed in here. Okay, so now they're installed, we can jump in and start importing these in. So to do that, we do const, and then for this one in OpenAI, we can import configuration and OpenAI API, and that is going to be from require OpenAI, and that's going to be inside of a string. Next one we want to import is Express, and then we want to import body parser, and then finally cause. So one more package we'll need to install as well, because we want to have an environment file, is .env, so npm I and then .env. This will allow us to store information securely, and then we can import that into here. So to do that slightly different, we go require.env.config. And then from here, inside the API part here, we can create a new file and do .env. So that's where we're going to store our API token from OpenAI. So now we can actually go in and start building the API. So to do this, to start off, we want to do const app equals express. That will initialize express as app, and then we can start telling it what we want to do with the app. So app.use, we want that to use body parser, and we want it to pass back JSON, and then we can have app.use cause, and now we can start adding our config from OpenAI. So config equals new configuration. This is a configuration from here, and that will be API key and whatever we've called it in our environment folder. So we called it API token, and then we close that off. And then what we want to do is we want to tell OpenAI is equal to new OpenAI API with that config in. So it's going to create a new instance of OpenAI API. So we can reference that when we're making requests to OpenAI's API. So for this project, we just want to create one endpoint, and that endpoint is going to be app.post, and it's going to just be called message with a slash in front. And then that is going to take two arguments, a request and a resolve. Now we're going to have an arrow function there, and this is what's going to contain all the information. So now we can actually build out the request to OpenAI. So that will be const, and then we're going to call this response, because that's what's coming back from OpenAI. And that's going to be equal to OpenAI.create completion. And this will take a few bits in. So what I'll do is I'll copy this and paste it in, because it's quite a lot of information that comes into here. So we have the modeler we want to use, so we're going to use the text DaVinci 003 model. There are about 5 or 6 different models you can use. The prompt is going to be the request.body, and we're going to have an extra one in here called prompt. So when we send the information over, we're going to send it in such a way that it will look like this. So that's how the information is going to get passed to the API. We can test this in Postman in a bit. So here we have temperature, top P, frequency penalty, presence penalty, and max tokens. Now the only one we should really be playing around here with is max tokens. It will cost you more money if you increase this up. If you lower it down, it won't cost you as much. So the response returns a promise, so we can have response.then, and then we can capture the data. And then we have another arrow function in there. And then what we can do is we can, for this one, we can console, actually no, we'll send it back. So we can say res.send, and we want to send an object back, and that'll be message and data.choices, and then we want the 0, first one of the index of the choices, and then .text. So just in case that fails, we're going to do a catch, and that's going to take in an error. And then what we can do is we can do res.send message with the error in. So let's just remove the last bracket off of there, so that should work. So that's the main part of the API now. So all we need to do is get it to listen. So we do app.listen, and we're going to have it listen on port 3000. And then what it will do is console log out that it's listening on port 3000 when that's ready. So if we run node dot, that should now launch the application. You can see it's listening on port 3000. There's been no errors running through. And then what we can do is we can launch up Postman and look at localhost 3000/message on a post. And then look at the body here. We have our message, which we'll call prompt. And what is the current population of the universe? Hit send. And that should come back with an answer. So that's the API done. What we need to do now is create the Angular application. So down here on the right hand side, we're going to hit this plus button to create a new terminal. I'm going to rename the first one to API so we can differentiate between them. I'll call the second one app. And then inside the app one, what we want to do is run ngn for Angular new, hit enter, and the name we're going to give this project will just be Chatbot. Yes, we'll have Angular routing at this time because we want to just have a look at it going through the routes. We're going to have Sass installed for this particular one, and that should take a second just to install the packages. Okay, so that's now installed a new Angular project, so we can now cd into that, so cd Chatbot, and then we can run ng-serve to ensure that that's actually working. So once that's compiled, we can click on the link over here by holding down Control and clicking on the link, and that should open it up in a browser for us. And as you can see here, this is the Angular project, and we can close down the API and open up the Chatbot here. So what we're going to be doing here, I'm going to open up a new terminal. We're going to leave Angular running. We're going to open up a new terminal, cd into Chatbot, and this is where we're going to start creating modules, services, and components. So the first thing we want to do is create a service. So we're not actually going to be editing the service at the moment, but we're just going to create the core of the actual application. I like to keep these separate in a shared folder. So what we can do is ng-g, which is generate, and s for service, and we want to generate that under a shared /services/message. Hit enter, and then that will create us now under here. We'll have a new folder called app shared, and we've got our messages in here under service. So the next one we want to create is a component. So let's call this ng G for generate, C for component, and we're going to do that also under the shared, and we're going to create a components, and that will be called help-support. So you can see it's created four files there and also updated the app.module.ts file. And we under shared here, we can see we have a new folder called components, and we have our help support component here. But if we have a look inside of our app modules, we can see that it's imported here as a declaration as well. So I think the first thing to do is to create the message service. So if we jump into services and message service.ts, we have this file here. And what we can do, we need to import our HTTP client. So we go private HTTP, and that will be HTTP client, and that will come from HTTP client from @Angular common HTTP. So we'll need to add some extra bits into the app module, but we'll do that in a second. So we're going to create a new function called send message. So I'll take message as an input, which will be as a string type. And then what we want to do is we want to return this.http.post, and we want to post that to http://localhost:3000, because that's a port we're at, /message. And then what we want to send to that is the object. The object will be prompt, and that will take in the message here. And then we close that off. So if we hit save, and then under app.module.ts, what we want to do under imports is import our HTTP client module. Oh, that's why I forgot to put a comma after app routing module. So that will now allow us to use HTTP client inside of the component, inside of the service. So let's now open up the help support and let's test that endpoint to make sure that we're actually getting information through. So to do that, first of all, I'm going to jump into the app.component.html and right down the bottom, under the router outlet for this particular one, what we're going to do is we're going to import our help support component. So that's all we need to do in there for the moment. You won't see anything on the front end yet because we haven't done any styling or anything. So if we open up the TypeScript file here, I'm going to have a constructor, and that's going to have an argument in there of private, and we want to have the message service, and the message service imported into there. And then we want to import that message service up the top here. So to test this, we're going to create a function called sendMessage, and that is going to send a message to this.messageService.sendMessage, because we're triggering this function here. And it's going to pass the message in we give into here, and then we're going to subscribe to this, and the response, we're just going to console log that out for now, but we will be adding this into an array. So inside the constructor, I'm going to create a send message. I'm going to say hello, and then what is your name? Click save. We jump back onto the front end. If we now look at the console log, we have this message back saying, message, my name is John. Right, I'm just going to attach that to the right hand side here, just so we can keep an eye on how the front end is going whilst we're coding. Right, so above the constructor we want to create a few variables. So we want to know if the actual message box is open, whether the messages are loading, we want a collection of the messages. We want to also build out the actual chat form, so we need to start creating reactive forms. So let's start with that. So let's go is open, and that's going to be equal to false, because it's not going to be open as soon as we hit the page. Loading is also going to be equal to false. The messages will be equal to an empty array for now. and the chat form. Sorry, like a bit of camel case here. The chat form will be equal to a new form group, and that form group will take in a message as a new form control, and that's going to be empty. That's going to be an empty string to start off with, and the validator is going to be required on that. So let's import these. So we can go quick fix here and add all missing imports, and that will import the form group, form controller, and validator from Angular Forms. So to get this to work as well, otherwise we'll get an error on the front end when we actually import the library in. If we go to app.modules, inside here, imports, we want to import the forms module and also the reactive forms module. We can quick fix this by adding all missing imports there as well. Hit save, and now the error has gone on the front end. So inside our send message function that we have down here, what we need to do is, as soon as we hit send on a message, we want to trigger that this.loading is now equal to true. And we also want to push the message that we're sending into that message array. So we're going to actually give it a type because we want to differentiate between whether it's a user that's sending the message or whether it's a message that's coming back from the server. So for the user, we'll have a type of user. For the server, we'll have a message of client. And that message is then going to be equal to this.chatform.value.message. So at the top of the file, just to fix this issue here, we're getting a type issue. So what we can do is let's just create a new type here. So to do that, we create an interface. We go export interface, and we want to call this message, and that will take in a type, which is going to be a type of string, and it will also take in a message, which is a type of string. And then underneath our message here, this is going to be equal to a message, and it's going to be an array type. So if we hit save, that should fix this. Type undefined, so it can come back as undefined. So to fix this message that's showing here as type string null undefined, it's not assignable to type string, we can pop a little exclamation mark at the end there. So when this responds, what we can do is we want to say this.loading is now equal to false. This.message, we want to now push this in there, so we're going to have a type, and that's going to be equal to client, and message will be equal to response.message. And then when we're inside of the actual bot window, what we'll probably want to do is we'll want to scroll to the bottom every time, so it always stays at the bottom. So to do this, we create a little extra function here, which we need to also reference inside the HTML. I'll talk about that in a second. So we're going to say scroll to bottom, and I'm just going to copy this one in here. This is a very dirty way of doing it, but it works very well. So we have this.myScroll container, so we need to now create the reference to that. And to do that, we come back up the top here to where we created these, and we have this @viewChild scroll me, and scroll me is the name of the div that we're going to associate this with. So we're going to import the viewChild up here, so we have import component and viewChild inside there. What we're doing here is we're taking the scroll top of this container that we're going to get, and we're going to set the actual scroll top to the height plus 500. And because we don't get a response straight away, we're going to offset the set timeout by 150 milliseconds. So it almost happens instantaneously on the users, from the user seeing it. it's almost invisible. They won't see what's happening here. So now we've got this scroll to bottom, what we can do is we can inject that into a few places. So the first place we want to do it is after we reset the form, which we need to put into here. So we're going to say this.chatForm.reset, and what that's going to do, that's going to remove this message from the front end form and clear it. And then we can say this.scroll to bottom here. So after they've sent the message and it's cleared the form, it's going to show that message and scroll to the bottom. And then once we've pushed this message in, what we want to do is we want to trigger this.scroll to bottom again. So we trigger a scroll when you send a message, and then a scroll when we receive a message back. So that's pretty much all the Angular part done for it. We need to create a function now to open up the pop-up. Yeah, so that's going to be quite simple. So we're just going to call this open support pop-up, and that's literally going to be this.isOpen. That's going to be this.isOpen, and that's going to be equal to not this.isOpen. Because what we're going to do is we're going to reference this in a few places. This will open and close the window, this same function, and all it's going to do is if this.open is equal to true, it will set it to false, and vice versa. So now that we've done that, we can actually start working on the HTML side of it. So we can close down the TypeScript file here, we can close down the message service, and then what we can do is actually start working on the front end part. So if we have a look here, we can see what help support works here. And that's what this is printing out. So let's remove that. I'm going to create a new div, and it's going to have an ID of help desk and a class. It won't have a class actually, just a div of IT help desk. And inside there, we're going to have a button, and that's going to have an ID of help desk pop-up dash button, and this is the button that we're going to use to click, and that will open the support pop-up. And that button will just say need help. So if we hit save, we should have a button that appears here, need help. Okay, so now we've got that button in, we can actually start creating the pop-up. So directly underneath the button, we'll have a div with an ID of help desk dash pop-up, and that will have a style dot display. Outside of that, sorry, that will have a style dot display. And that style display is going to be equal to isOpen. We're going to have a short if statement here. So if it is true, we want to display block. Otherwise, we want to display none. So now we're going to create the header. So that would be div ID equals help desk dash pop-up dash header, and inside here we're going to have coding nexus help desk, and we're also going to have a button inside of here with an ID of help desk dash pop-up dash button, and on clicking that, so click, we're going to trigger the same function we have here, open support pop-up, because it will see that it's open and then it will close it, and we'll just have the word close on this one. We save it and then reload, it should load the front end. We can see need help, coding next one is help desk, close, and that disappears, that opens and closes. Cool. So outside of that div below the button, so here, currently line 12, what we want to do is create the actual content of the body now. So this will be div ID is equal to help desk dash pop-up dash body, and then inside here we're going to list our messages. So we're going to have a div with a class of messages, and what we looked at earlier inside the back here, this scroll me, this is where that's going to go. So what it's going to do is it's going to look at that. So did we have a capital M there for that? Yeah, we did. Scroll me, capital M. It's going to look at this div here, see the height of this div, and then scroll to the bottom of that div. And then what we can do is we can start looping over the messages that we're actually receiving from the server and the ones that we're posting across. So to do that, we do ng4. And then we put let message is message of messages. I'm going to give that a class of message. And then inside this div, we're going to have a class, and that class name is going to be equal to the message.type. And then inside here, we're just going to post in the message content. So that will be message.message. So I'm just going to see why messages doesn't exist. So here we go. So up here, line 18, I called this message accidentally. We want to call that messages, and then fix that down here for when we push into them. So that one and that one. And then we can hit save on that, and that should work. So then outside of this, so 2 closing divs down, we want to create a new line, and we've got a loading state. So when we're waiting for a message to come back from the API, we want to show that it's thinking. So we're going to have this same as what it is above, but instead we're going to have extra bits in here. So the div is going to be a class of client. And it's just going to show 3 dots. We're also going to give this just a bit of inline styling. And it's going to be a width of 100%, and it's going to display block. Right, so we're actually almost there. We just need to now build out the actual form that's going to show. So let's see how that's looking at the moment. So let's click the need help button, and there we go. Hi, my name is John, and this is the message that we're sending here when we trigger this.send message. So just stop doing that at the moment, because it's now going to send a message every time it reloads. And what we want to do is create a default message just to show at the beginning, and that's going to come from the client, and you can put in this message whatever you want. For this one, it's hi, I'm your support agent, how can I help you? Hit save. Then in the front end, it will trigger that, and this will show the first message that's showing here. So inside of this here, we also need an ng if statement, because we want to know if it's loading, because if you can see on the front end here, we've got these 3 dots. So here we want to put ng if, and then loading. Then those 3 dots will show every time it loads. So it's not showing at the moment. So let's now build out the form. So that form will appear 3 div closes below this client here. So 2 from the bottom. I'm going to create a form with an ID of help desk pop-up footer. And that is going to take in a form group, and that is the form group that we created earlier. So chat form. I'm just going to check that that is the correct one. So chat form, yep, that one there. And then inside here, we're going to have an input, and the input is going to have a form control name, and that form control name is going to be message. And it's going to have a type outside of that, a type of text. We're going to give it an ID of help desk pop-up input. So help desk pop-up dash input. And then for a placeholder, we want to say type your message here, or we can say ask a question or how can we help you. But for this, we'll just leave it as type your message here. So that's the input, and then directly underneath the input, we're going to have a button. This is to submit the actual message, and that is going to have an ID of help desk dash pop-up dash submit dash button. And it's what we're going to do is we're going to run a disabled, so the actual button will be disabled if the chat form values are not valid. So chat form dot valid, and we're going to have this not in front of it. So that will disable the button if the input field is empty, because in here we've told it that this message is a required field. And then we can close that button. We need to trigger a click function here like we did before, and that click function will be send message. That's the same as the send message we have here. So we'll get rid of this message string here because we're no longer using that. Instead, what we're using is this dot chat form value. And what we can do is assign the sent message, and that'll be equal to that there. So now we can use this sent message in all of these areas. So sent message and sent message here. And the same on the end there. We have the exclamation mark, and that should fix all of those. So if we hit save, go back into here, how many people are alive, click send, we can see it's got the 3 dots here, and then it comes in with the answer and those 3 dots disappear. So for the CSS on this one, I'm going to copy and paste this in because it's quite a lot of code in here. And then what we'll do is we'll run through and talk what's happening. So we've got the help desk here, the very top level one that we have on the HTML. So help desk here. And then we're giving that a font family, so everything under here will have the font family of Roboto. So what we can do is we can quickly get that from Google Fonts. And then here we can have our import for Roboto. So we'll just pop that above here. So we've imported Roboto. So the help desk pop-up button, which is this button we can see here, I've saved it so it's now looking like it would do. You can see it's fixed to the bottom. We have 20 pixels from the bottom, 20 pixels from the right, so it just sits not sitting flush on the edge. We have a padding on the button of 10 to 20 pixels, background color of 333, just to give it a grey, dark grey background, font color white, with a border of none, border radius of 5, just to give it a nice smooth feel. The cursor is going to be pointer, so when we hover over it we get that nice finger arrow. Font size of 14 and Z index of 1000. We don't need to go that high, but if you're putting this onto a theme that you don't know, it's best to go quite high so you know it's going to sit on top of everything. So as I scroll through this, you can see nothing goes over the top of it. So as for the help desk pop-up, when we click here, we can see that we've got the help desk pop-up. I need to figure out why that close button is doing that. Okay, so the issue as to why this close is sitting there, even with that CSS, is the help desk pop-up button should be help desk pop-up dash close button, just for this one. And then you can see it sitting at the top there. So cool. I'll change this back to 20 pixels. So what that does is when it opens up, it covers the button. I'll increase that to 40, so you may need to tweak this a little bit. There we go. So it covers the button, and we have a nice close at the top there. So let's keep that open and we'll run through what the rest of this is doing. So we have the help desk pop-up, which we've been through. It's position fixed, 40 from the bottom, 20 from the right, a width of 300 pixels, a height of 50 view height, but a minimum height of 450 pixels. So if I was to scroll up here, for example, it's a minimum height of 450 pixels, but if I was to come down, we can see as we hit here, it grows with the page. So it goes to a 50% view height of the page. And then we have a background color of white, a box shadow just to give it a bit of depth. We have a border radius of 5 pixels, nice and soft edges, a z-index of 1000, so that's sitting on top of everything, and an initial display of none. So that's what gets triggered when we have this bit here. This help desk pop-up style display is open. It changes from none to block when that's triggered to is open, is triggered to true. So the pop-up header is this bit here. So this grey bit at the top here, we have a background of grey. We've kept the same greys throughout for the button, for the messages as well. The messages for the client and the messages for the user are slightly different colours. So we have a background of grey, colour of white, font size 18, padding of 10, and a border radius of 5 pixels by 5 pixels at the top, but then 0 and 0 at the bottom. So we have a nice straight line here and not curved. The close button is floated right with a border of none, background of transparent, colour of white, font size of 14, and again the cursor pointer. The main body, what I've done here is I've given it a height of 100% of the box minus 113 pixels. That is for the height of this box and this box added together. And that's then got a padding of 10 pixels just to give it a nice feel, so not everything's sitting up against the edges again. The help desk pop-up footer, again it's a background of dark grey with a colour of white, font size 14, padding of 10 pixels, and border radius is the reverse type of the header, so it's curved at the bottom and straight at the top. The input has a width of 100% with a padding of 10 pixels, a border of 1 pixel solid and white. This matches the button underneath, we'll go through that in a second. A border radius of 5 pixels at the top left, 5 pixels at the top right, and 0 and 0 there, so it sits nice and flush up with the button. A box sizing of border box, and a font size of 14 pixels. And as for the button, it's pretty much the same as this, but the border radius is in reverse, and the background colour is a blue instead of a white. And we've given that everything exactly the same. So as for the messages, this is what we see pop into here. We have a height of 100 pixels for the messages, overflow of auto. Each message, we've got a flow root, as they sit nicely underneath each other, a width of 100%, and this is where we come into the client message and the user message. So the client message, as we can see here, has a background of grey with a colour of white, padding of 10 pixels, border radius all the way around of 5 pixels, margin of 10 pixels, so when the next message comes in, it sits 10 pixels below that one. And this is going to be displayed as an inline block with a max width of 80%. And I do that so when the user's message comes in, it actually sits over here and 80% width as well. So it sort of sits here. We'll see that in a second. And the user message, so if we type a message in here saying, "Can you help me?" There we go. So it's got a nice left, right, left, right, left, right fill. And it has a border of 0.5 pixels, a background color of white. And the font color is the same as the background color, padding 10 pixels, and so this is everything the same as above. And then we have a text line right, just to differentiate between the other messages, and we have a float right on there as well. So if we put a bit more of a longer message in, we can see it's loading there, and you can see now we're approaching the bottom. So if I now ask it another question, you can see, look, it's popping, it's scrolling to the bottom each time now. So we've got a nice flow of messages happening here. If you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button. Also check out my Patreon page to support me. If you want to see me create this for a WordPress plugin, I'm doing that at the moment. There will be a link to that on my Patreon page when that comes out for you to be able to download and install onto your WordPress site. If you want to find out more about chatbots, click on this link on the screen now, and thank you for watching.